Okay, I'm going to kick us off and welcome everybody to the 58th annual meeting of Mental Health America of Southwestern PA. So can you believe, again, we're here virtually? I know when we talked about me being board chair, I was really nervous about these speaking events. Who would have known I never really had to do them in person? So that was, for me, one of the silver linings, I guess. But I can't wait to get back in person to see everybody. So I'm Kim Sonnefeld. I am the board chair of Mental Health America and it's been my pleasure to work with Lori and the entire board, just something that I'm just so passionate about. So we could not do this without our sponsors. So thank you for our sponsors, our premier sponsor, Community Care Behavioral Health and UPMC Health Plan. Thank you. You guys are always awesome. There is no health without mental health. So the silver sponsor, Beacon Health, again, thank you so very much for your support. So the bronze sponsors include Allegheny Health Network, Westmoreland Case Management Services, and Janssen Pharmaceuticals. I also wanted to thank the United Way, the Community Foundation of Westmoreland County, and the Staunton Farm Foundation for their support of the agency programs, and of course the art cellar, which hopefully, as Ron just said in the VIP room, will be opening sometime soon. We can't wait till we get to show off the art cellar, and I'm sure Lori will be doing tours hopefully one day soon here. So everybody who registered should have gotten a virtual program book. I know that I'm hoping somebody will pop that into the chat if that's possible. If not, you should have received one. And hopefully, again, if somebody could pop that in, you could take a look at our virtual program book. I would like to thank the board of directors and all the special event committee members. So without you, these events don't happen. And I think it's one of those things that you think it's not going to be as difficult to do a virtual event, and it really is. So thank you, Special Events Committee and all the other board of directors. It's really appreciated. So I'd be remiss without talking about our Bell of Hope and encouraging everybody to be a Bell of Hope member. It's in the program book, but the Bell of Hope, if you don't know, it's symbolic of cast from the shackles, which bound people, and it gives hope from the freedom that there will be victory over mental illness. So again, please, those dollars are just really important now more than ever. There's just not enough support for people who need mental health services or just somebody to talk to. Thank you, Rachel. I see Rachel did put that in the chat. So if you haven't got an opportunity to see it, it is now in the chat box. I think, again, you know, especially in these times, this last year and a half has been challenging for all of us. I don't think anybody who's on this Zoom call does not know somebody personally who's been impacted. I know it's really difficult to find somebody to even see at this point. There's not enough people to provide services. So I know we're going to be talking about all this, but again, we really, programs like MHA, we really need your support and we appreciate it. So before we get to the fun part, we do have to officially have a meeting. So as defined by our bylaws, a brief business meeting will be conducted. I will be asking the current board members to make motions and asking for approvals as motions are presented. Looks like everybody's camera is on, and it looks like you'll be able to unmute yourself. So if you could make the motion, and we can record that for the minutes. The 58th annual meeting of the membership of Mental Health America of Southwestern PA, also known as MHA of Southwestern PA, is now called to order. On behalf of the Mental Health America, I am pleased to present to the membership 2 new nominations to be elected for a 3-year term to serve on the board of directors beginning January 2022. Edna McCutcheon and Beverly Stonick. The slate of returning board members for another 3-year term includes Judge Anthony Marcelli, Kim Sonnefeld, Justin Trombetta, and Deb Wasselcheck. Now I request a motion to cast a unanimous ballot to elect the slate of nominees, new and returning, as presented.
So moved.
Okay. Can you please state your name?
Don Gowler.
Okay, thank you, Dawn. May I have a second, please?
Lisa Isaac, I second.
Thank you, Lisa. Any opposed? If opposed, please say nay. Okay, the motion carries. The slate of officers for MHA of Southwestern PA is as follows. The officer slate: President Mary Beth Grandinetti Pultz, Vice President Adam Quattrini, Treasurer Justin Trombetta. A good thing he's, I'm messing up his name really bad, so I hope to correct me. And Secretary Dawn Gallagher, immediate past President Kim Sonnefeld. I'm requesting a motion for the slate of officers to be elected. Can I have one board member please state your name and cast the motion?
Rick Stowagon, so moved.
May I have a second, please?
Toni Marcelli, I make the motion to second motion.
Thank you, Judge Marcelli. Any opposed? If so, please say nay. Okay, the motion carries. I'd also like to acknowledge this time our outgoing board members. Bill Magna. Bill was a former president. He's currently our secretary. Joan Stairs, she served three-year terms and chair of the Special Events Committee, and Dr. Shahood. Thank you for all that you've done for MHA. You guys, Joan and Bill have been just so active and been very welcoming, I know, since I've been on board. So thank you for everything. We know that you're leaving, but you're not leaving, so that you're still going to continue to be involved with the agency, and we're certainly going to hold you to it. So thank you for everything from the bottom of our hearts. That's it for the business. So may I have a motion from one of the board members to adjourn the meeting? I need your name and the motion.
Mary Beth, I move that we adjourn the meeting.
May I have a second, please?
Chris Feliciani, I'll second the motion.
Okay. Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries. So now it is my pleasure to get to turn it over to Lori Barnett Levine. So Lori is the Chief Executive Officer of MHA of Southwestern PA. Lori is a dedicated advocate. I was just with a colleague eating lunch today, and she just talked, she had no idea that I was Lori's board chair. And she was just talking about how much Lori is an advocate, the work she does to help other agencies. And so I did sort of brag and say, oh, well, I'm on her board. So thank you, Lori, for everything you do. And I'm going to turn it over to you to what's going to be a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
So this is one of the most enjoyable parts of my job, and that's giving awards to special people. And Toni is a special person. So Toni is the recipient of our award this evening, Toni Antonucci. And for those of you who do not know Toni, soon after you get to really know her, you'll realize that you have met someone who's really special. Her vibrant, energetic, positive personality will engage you and even inspire you. When I first met Toni, she was an undergraduate student with an interest in mental health. She had a temporary part-time position at MHA-SWPA. As I learned about her story, I found out that it was not as simple as it seemed. Toni started her college career at the age of 40. She told me that having her son see her graduate was a shining moment in her life. Toni also told me that she remembered her very first day at the local community college as if it was yesterday. She said this, "I was sitting in an intro to algebra class, scared out of my mind because, well, it was algebra. The instructor was brand new. He was 23 years old and scribbled equations on the board so small and fast that only an ant could read it. By the end of class, I was in tears and ready to quit. That evening at home, when I told my boys how mom's first day of school went, and that I was ready to give up. My oldest son, Rob, who's with us this evening, was a physics major, and he said, 'Mom, you taught us algebra. I'm a physics major. I think you can do this, and if you need help, you have us.' And succeed she did. Since her college graduation from Seton Hill University, Toni went on to receive her master's degree in social work. She served as our director of development, was a therapist, and now works for Westmoreland Community Action. Also during that time, she supported all of her children, but especially her son, Gary, or Dimitri, as he liked to be called. Dimitri had become addicted to drugs and was in rehab and became a voice for recovery. Among other things, Dimitri was a talented artist. Many of you remember him from our Innovations program, where he created and donated works of art. Joanna Stillwagon received one of those and says that she treasures it to this day. Dimitri spoke on a panel at a Mental Health America conference. He volunteered for many events in the community. Art, poetry, and artists for recovery were his passion. What I didn't realize at the time was the extent of Toni's artistic skills and her passion for art. She is a very talented artist who has donated her art too, also some for Innovations. On July 4th, 2018, Toni experienced every parent's nightmare. Dimitri passed away from a fatal drug overdose. Despite his very best efforts, he had relapsed and the drugs won. Toni has turned that tremendous loss into something so beautiful. She has honored Dimitri's life by carrying on his passion. Toni says she picked up the brush where Dimitri left off. Some of her accomplishments include: in September of 2018, Toni collaborated with the Westmoreland Cultural Trust to host an interactive Art for Recovery at the Palace Theater. In 2018, Toni and her son Rob created a mosaic tile in Dimitri's honor to be installed at Spring Avenue Park for the restoration project. In 2019, Toni collaborated with the Westmoreland Cultural Trust and Sage's Army to host an Art for Recovery event in St. Clair Park during the Greensburg Music Fest. In 2021, Toni hosted Art for Recovery at the Freeport Event Center. Toni worked with Barbara Ferrier to set up a scholarship in Dimitri's name at Westmoreland Community College. The first round of awardees was in January of 2019. Throughout this time, Toni has continued to talk to countless parents and families who call her about their loved ones. She is never too busy to speak with them. Toni also helped to form a support group when she worked at MHA for family members who lost loved ones to overdose. She helped to inspire the concept of the art cellar that you have heard mentioned and the space that has been redesigned to host this program. Toni has worked for and volunteered with Sage's Army. She is now an adjunct professor at the schools where she was once a student. She teaches students about drugs and alcohol. Toni, your resilience, your strength, and positivity have brought you to this point. You have bravely and passionately carried out Dimitri's legacy. His work and art lives on through you, and I'm sure that Dimitri would be so proud of you this evening. I know all of your friends and family are. Fred Funari was a founding member and past president of Mental Health America of Southwestern PA. His family honors his memory with this award. Toni will be receiving an actual award shaped like the bell that you see on the cover of this evening's program booklet. And again, as Kim mentioned, this bell, there's an actual bell that is in the national office that was formed from shackles of mental patients in mental hospitals. And the bell is rung every year at our national conference to honor the memory and to remember that we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. It is my honor on behalf of the Funari family to present you with the Fred Funari Award of Distinction. So with this, I bring you Toni.
Wow. Thank you, Lori. Speechless. Thank you, Lori, and thank you, MHA of Southwestern PA. I'm truly at a loss for words to be receiving this award. Josie and Fred Funari are and were distinguished members of our community. I can't hold a candle to them. Someone asked me a few weeks ago, what is this award and why was I receiving it? I didn't know how to answer that. I told them apparently someone thinks I have distinction. Then on Sunday, I was on the phone with Mary Ann Ida Miller. She was interviewing me for the Latro Bulletin. I was in the middle of making 12 apple pies. There's flour all over the kitchen. I'm peeling apples, talking to Mary Ann on speakerphone. At the same time, I'm messaging with a dad who's looking for help to get his son into treatment. Is that what distinction looks like? I don't think so. That's just another day. Sorry, Lord. I genuinely set out each and every day to make the next day better. What that looks like each day changes. It could be an artistic endeavor, teaching, fundraising, enjoying my family, or advocating on behalf of someone else. All I know.
We've got you, Toni. We've got you.
Thanks. All I know is that academically, professionally, people like you, Lori, and Dr. Dropa have taught me so much. I could not do this without the help of so many people. I now have the opportunity to work with Mandy from Westmoreland Community Action, my sons who cheered me on when I was overwhelmed with school, my youngest son, Dimitri, who taught me so much more about addiction than any textbook ever could, and whose legacy I can continue with Art for Recovery. And yet, my biggest supporter, he's my forever partner, Tom. Without him and his quiet behind the scenes, get it done support, truly, truly, none of this could be possible. Thank you, Tom. Now, not only did Fred Funari help develop mental health services in Westmoreland County, but I learned today that he held a Bachelor of Arts degree from St. Vincent. It's funny how life comes full circle and how fitting this award is after all. I'm here today because of the juncture of mental health, substance use, art, and advocacy. I will continue to volunteer, to learn, to teach, and to advocate, just as Fred and Dimitri would do. Together, we can make a difference. From the bottom of my heart, thank you.
Oh, can't we clap?
Yay, Toni.
Oh, got me in.
Congratulations, yay.
Hi, Mary. I'm getting all these things in chat. Thank you.
Toni, you have left us all speechless.
Oh, thank you, Lori.
Congratulations, and thank you so much for all that you do to make the world a better place. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that you continue to do for Mental Health America of Southwestern PA too. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So I am going to take a moment from this very emotional part of our annual meeting. And I want to just give a special thank you to all the staff at Mental Health America who helped to make us as good as we are. And I want a special thank you to Ron Weaver, Rachel Cunningham, and Beth Crawford, because they're the team behind this event tonight. And they have worked through illness, through fire, through power outages. And I'm just really grateful to you for helping to make this event this evening. It is now my pleasure to introduce Representative Michael Schlossberg of the Pennsylvania House District 132. Now, Representative Schlossberg has been nice enough to give us his time this evening, even though we are not his constituents, and even though we cannot vote for him. But this just shows you how passionate he is about mental health. So we are really pleased to welcome you this evening. You've been a passionate advocate for improved mental health services, and you've been open about your own mental health struggles, and you've used those experiences to advocate for others. You've even written your own book, Redemption. State Representative Schlossberg was reelected to a 5th term in November of 2020, continuing his commitment to community leadership. For the 2021 session, he was elected Democratic Caucus Administrator. Representative Schlossberg is Democratic co-chair and co-founder of the Mental Health Caucus, allowing him to focus on helping other members of the General Assembly and the citizens of Pennsylvania to understand mental health issues and concerns. In September of 2015, Representative Schlossberg was honored to accept an invitation to become a member of the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency's Mental Health and Justice Advisory Committee, providing guidance and structure to ensure statewide coordination and effectiveness in Pennsylvania's criminal justice and mental health systems. He has received numerous awards for his advocacy, including an award from Mental Health America, our national organization, which I was honored to present him with, of course, over Zoom. We've never really met I think we did meet once or twice face to face, but we've
I don't know anymore.
only met
You have a
over
lower
Zoom.
half. Do any of us at this point? I honestly don't know.
So one of the things that Representative Schlossberg said is that he never planned on going public with his depression and anxiety. Certainly, he says, not in a loud way. His family and friends knew, but it wasn't something that he wore on his sleeve. This all changed with the suicide of Robin Williams. And ironically, last night on ABC, they had an hour special on Robin Williams, his life, and his suicide. So Representative Schlossberg decided that it was time to tell his story, and he wrote an op-ed in the Morning Call, local paper. He detailed his own struggles with depression and anxiety. His story ended up being an amazing benefit to his career. And for that, we are extremely grateful. And we welcome Representative Schlossberg. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and hi to everybody out there. It's my honor to be with all of you today. I do see the chat, so as you folks have questions, comments, or you want to throw virtual potatoes at me, please feel free. This is one of the many benefits of being able to give a Zoom speech. Although, as I've said countless times lately, I am so sick of giving speeches in a Zoom suit. I miss the face-to-face interaction. Unfortunately, we do seem to be coming back to that. But the truth, unfortunately, is that we're probably going to have to do these Zoom speeches for at least a little while longer. Strangely enough, and maybe it's just me, but I do think that a lot of the COVID noise really has kind of faded into the background. Most of us at this point have figured out how to live with it. Booster shots can improve outcomes. They're going to be widely available for those of us who got the Moderna shot. Pfizer's already out there. As a dad of a 10 and an 8-year-old, I am only checking Twitter every 3 seconds to find out when vaccines are going to be available for kids. COVID is not going away, but the damage it causes can be and is being mitigated. Now, that being said, as sick of talking about COVID as we all are, it doesn't change the fact that it is a huge driver of countless conversations. And there's obviously no question that it's impacted mental health. So let me talk about that for a moment. It is not as if things were going swimmingly in the mental health universe before COVID, but we all know the truth. Things have unquestionably taken a turn downhill. Now, according to some of the available statistics, adults experiencing anxiety or depression increased by about 15% between 2020 and 2021, whereas the number of adults who said their mental health care needs were unmet increased 20%. 69% of parents said that their kids had fallen behind in school, and 50% of all households said that someone within their home had serious problems with depression, anxiety, stress, or sleeping as a result of the pandemic. These statistics were even worse among the youth of our country. Rates of depression, suicidal ideation, anxiety, and more increased dramatically during this time. We all know why those increases occurred. Social distancing, break from school routines, stress at home, or a loved one actually getting COVID. And I do want to talk about that point in particular, because I think as we have conversations about COVID and about the impact that mitigation measures can have, which are unquestionably real, I think we often forget about it. I've been extensively involved in mental health, but it's not the only thing that I've been involved with, and I've tried to be as forceful as possible for what I think are science and reason-based mitigation measures. One of the most frustrating things I hear as we have conversations about COVID is all the trauma that these mitigation measures and masking orders are causing. And to an extent, there's no question that's true. But I think we often forget that there's 140,000 kids who have lost a primary or secondary caregiver of COVID. And I never want to lose sight of the fact that watching a loved one die due to a preventable disease is far more traumatic than a temporary face covering. I also don't want to forget that COVID has had a disproportionately negative impact on minority groups in America. Now, those minority groups come in a lot of different shapes, sizes, and looks, but every single statistic that I mentioned earlier is even worse among vulnerable groups and racial minorities. Children of color and members of the LGBTQ population were much more likely than others to report worse emotional and cognitive health, higher rates of anxiety, depression, addiction, and thoughts of suicide. I also don't want to forget, and I think that sometimes urban-based legislators like me have a tendency of doing this, that these statistics also apply in a very, very negative way to rural America. Rural Americans, on average, have far worse physical and emotional health outcomes than their urban or suburban counterparts. And one of the things I've tried to get across as a very, very liberal Democrat to both my urban and rural colleagues is we have a lot more in common with each other than we maybe realize. So it seems worth saying again that COVID didn't create any of these inequities. It just made them a million times worse. Systemic racism and a variety of structural inequities play a critical role in why these issues are as bad as they are. They have exacerbated a slew of different issues that we are currently facing in America. Now, probably the most important thing within the mental health space from a public policy perspective is the shortage issues which all mental health providers are facing. One of the things we were actually just talking about before this meeting began was the desperate need for more employees within mental health. Of course, the only way we get those additional employees is if we actually pay them a fair wage. That is one of the things that I think we desperately need to work on in government. The mental health fields and drug and alcohol treatment fields do not have the resources to pay what people desperately need within a very competitive labor shortage workspace. Honestly, it kind of blows me away because we're talking about vital social services, vital supports to our society, things like mental health, drug and alcohol treatment, and childcare, and they have to compete and are often losing the competition with the wage that we pay warehouse workers. Don't get me wrong, I like ordering things from Amazon just as much as the next person. And in the Lehigh Valley, in my region of the state, our warehouses are a vital part of our economy. But what does it say about our society that ordering consumer goods pays more than taking care of vulnerable people? What does that say about our priorities and about where we are? In a recent op-ed, Kids Piece, which is the leading behavioral care provider for children in the Lehigh Valley and quite possibly the rest of the state, said that they were only operating at a 50% capacity. And if you ask any of your elected officials, and I'm sure those of you who are on this call can sympathize, one of the biggest calls that I get in my office is from a person or a family member with someone in crisis that is desperate for a bed, that is desperate for help, that organizations like Kids Piece would love to provide, but simply cannot because they don't have the staff necessary to actually be able to treat people who need it. All of this, including the labor shortage, obviously connects to COVID as well. countless people are re-examining their lives in what is commonly being referred to as the Great Resignation. This means that more people than ever are leaving fields, and fields with money can boost their pay. But fields that are resource-strapped, fields that are dependent on government funding that hasn't been increased, they can't. Combine that with rising inflation, and mental health practitioners are truly in a very bad spot. The end result of all of these factors is a rising demand for mental health services and an inability to meet it, especially if we at the state and local levels don't summon the political will to fund these services the way that they deserve. Now, I could go on for hours, and no pun intended, it would probably make you all very depressed about everything wrong within the mental health space, but I don't want to do that because I think we spend too much time talking about all the terrible things in this world. Indeed, it seems as if a good portion of the time we are surrounded by this existential dread. There's a lot of reasons for that. Things are obviously very frightening right now. We have rapid polarization within society and oversaturation of news media, a pandemic that continues somewhat abated, but continues to kill our friends and neighbors. But, and it feels strange saying this, I do want to take a little bit of a different tact, and I do want to talk about the things that went right because of COVID, even the things that went right within the mental health space. Perhaps most important, and honestly most stunning, is this. Somehow, in 2020, suicides reversed a near 20-year trend and actually decreased by about 5 or 6%. Despite the massive rise in stressors and mental illness across the board, according to publicly available information, suicides went down. This obviously begs a very important question. Why? How did this happen? It's counterintuitive, but I think there are still some answers, and I think there's lessons that can be learned from those answers. First and foremost, the beginning. At the beginning of this pandemic, we hit the heroism phase. That was before masks and mandated business closures and political divisions and all of that. It seemed as if we were all fighting something together. People rallied together against a common enemy, not unlike that we've seen in wars against foreign nations or terrorism. Of course, that eventually faded relatively quickly, but some of that heroism still held together. And there was still a little bit of a common bond that many of us were able to share and find solace within each other. At the start of the pandemic, there were a variety of government waivers that were passed, including probably most notably, waivers that made it easier for people to get telehealth. One of the big challenges that we face in Pennsylvania right now is that while telehealth is still mandated to be covered, that will change once the legislature doesn't approve the waiver that was extended again. And that's a real problem because as a result of telehealth, people had an easier time than ever accessing mental health services. This, combined with the fact that elected officials and individuals across the world made an extremely conscious effort to talk about mental illness and the resources that were available, absolutely pushed more people to get help that they desperately needed. These two factors working together may help to explain why suicides decline. It may also be worth noting that people had means to suicide reduced. Suicides usually happen when the individual was alone and with kids home from school, many home from work. People lost their privacy and thus their means. One of the things that I really found as I got more involved with the mental health and suicide reduction is just how important means reduction is. It's an area that's often not understood fully by people who aren't familiar with suicide. Now, to be clear, I don't think this was a huge factor in suicide reduction. In fact, I don't think any of these factors that I'm talking about were the home run. But I do think that each of these factors saved a few lives, and that got us to this reduction. I would argue that probably most critically is that stigma and support were the biggest part of the reason that suicides declined so rapidly in the face of all of these mental health stressors. Let me turn back to a moment to the statistic that I found most impactful of the ones that I reviewed for this speech. 50% of people had a member of their household who experienced some sort of serious mental distress. I'd be willing to wager that everyone in the country knew at least someone who had mental health difficulties during this time. One of the most important things about anti-stigma work I found is that it be done in a manner that's relatable. The truth is that your friend, neighbor, family member, or loved one can make a much bigger stigma impact than any celebrity ever could. If someone that you know and love is in pain, you will be more likely to get them the help that they need. And in a pandemic and lockdown setting, it is almost impossible to miss when someone is hurting. I would also say this. I think COVID has really helped to spur a great existential crisis, and it forced many of us to reevaluate their lives. On a personal level, with less events to go to, it actually gave me a chance to spend more time with my loved ones and my family. Now, to be clear, I am very, very different, and I'm very, very privileged in the life that I lead. I never faced any of the economic stressors that I'm sure many of you did. But there's a lot of people who were in that boat. And unfortunately, under normal circumstances, there's a lot of mental illness and suicide within that demographic. But as a result of COVID, people reevaluated what they spent time doing and got to spend more time with loved ones. I think this is one of the many reasons why so many people have since left the workforce. People have decided to do things that they love and reevaluate their lives. In many cases, I think that led to less stress. And in many cases, that led to less suicide. All of this begs the question, with the pandemic, hopefully, entering its final phases, what can we learn? What can we do better? Let me be clear about something. Many of these answers cannot come from the government. Now, I feel like a bad liberal Democrat saying this, but it's still a true statement. Much of the changes that are needed within our mental health space are individual or family-oriented in nature. We need to help our kids break away from these digital devices. There's a deep irony in me saying that of all people, because I am way, way, way too obsessed with social media, and I just started a TikTok account. Don't follow it, bad idea. But we still need to help our kids break away from these devices, because doing so increases face-to-face interaction, which is unquestionably a supportive factor in preventing mental illness. At the same time, I think we need to do a better job of teaching resiliency, ending helicopter parenting, and encouraging our kids to get away from the nest a little bit more. Most importantly, when it comes to parenting, I would argue this, and it's one of the hardest things that I can do as a parent, certainly. We have to encourage our kids to fail, because it's only through learning how to fail that our kids are going to learn how to succeed. Now, that being said, there's still no question. The state and federal government have absolutely critical roles to play in protecting our mental health. Now, we've done some good things, at least at the state level, in the past few years. We passed training requirements for teachers and counselors, increased certain mental health line items, and passed specific suicide prevention and mental health bills for college students and first responders. There's also going to be more action later this week. In fact, I just got the committee notice that legislation is starting to move through that would remove what I think are some burdensome regulations that make it harder for behavioral health and physical health providers to communicate. I also have a piece of legislation going through that'll help codify suicide death review teams and opioid death review teams and make it easier for local groups to conduct these very, very important death reviews. That being said, the most important thing we have to do is address the behavioral health practitioner shortfall. And there's only one way to do that: money. I see somebody is asking about that. It's a very, very timely question. So let me explain a little bit about how the funding works. The state only pays typically about 10% of the rates for mental health reimbursements, at least on Medicare and Medicaid. The rest of that comes from the federal government. It's a pass-through. What that means is that we need to work with our federal partners to increase those reimbursement rates. Now, there are still things that we can do at the state level. First of all, I think there are some reimbursement line items that we can increase. We can also increase our overall funding of this area, restore cuts to human services, increase and create bed databases so that people who are looking for inpatient care for their loved ones can find it a little bit easier. Those are a few of the things, but I'd also argue that we have to make it more affordable. The truth, again, is that the state doesn't have the resources the federal government does, but we have to make it more affordable for people to go into healthcare. And by doing that, I think we can actually increase practitioners. Now, we did enact a very, very limited physician loan forgiveness program, but the demand far, far outstrips the need. And what that says to me is that we've got a good thing and we need to increase the funding. Of course, and again, bad liberal Democrats saying this, but money isn't everything. We have to teach our kids about mental health in order to ensure that they know what mental health is, how to protect their own mental health, and how to recognize mental illness in others. There's a variety of pieces of legislation that have been proposed to do just that. I'm a co-sponsor of one, and I actually saw Representative Aaron Coffer propose another bill, I think earlier this week. I also want to make sure, because I'd be remiss, especially in talking about this, I know with at least one county commissioner on the line, if we didn't talk about the 988 change that's coming. So as many of you probably know, by June or July 2022, instead of dialing the suicide prevention hotline, people will be able to dial 988. Now, that's not the only change. The federal government also gave states the opportunity to enact specific funding streams to fund these 988 call centers, as well as crisis care. The truth is that what good is 988 if nobody answers the phone, or somebody answers the phone, but then doesn't actually have the resources to dispatch help? So that's legislation that we need to develop. The how much and where that money comes from are key questions that I don't have the answer to yet. I am on a task force that consists of members of all four caucuses, House, Senate, Democrats, and Republicans, that's trying to find the answer and trying to balance both the needs and the political viability. The truth is that in the legislature, we don't like enacting taxes or fees, even if they're specific to certain items. It's going to be a difficult needle to thread, but I think we need to find it. I know we need to find it. And one of the nice things that I've seen, again, self-admitted flaming liberal Democrat, is that there seems to be an increasing awareness among Republicans about the importance of mental health. And again, especially among rural Republicans, I'd actually argue more so than suburban Republicans, because my rural colleagues really bear the brunt of these shortfalls and the lack of any of the ability for anybody to get the help they need. I know everything that I mentioned seems really, really overwhelming, but let me end on a hopeful note, and that's this. I think this really is a mental health moment. COVID has taught us a lot of lessons. Thank you very much, Commissioner. Nicely done. You made me laugh. COVID has changed a lot of perspectives, and I think mental health is really one of them. In my conversations with others, and I had a lot of people reach out to me certainly during COVID, and now I've had a lot of people bring up mental health more so, be more aware of its importance, not only in themselves or their loved one. COVID has changed the way that people are talking about mental health and the conversations that elected officials of both parties are having. It really does seem clear to me that there is a new priority being given to mental health. This is wonderful news, but it's a starting point. So let me conclude, as I often do when giving these speeches, by turning it back over to all of you. I am one member of the 203 Pennsylvania House of Representatives. There are 203 of us in total, and there's 50 state senators, as well as the governor's administration. The truth, and I sincerely mean that, is that despite these polarized, fractured, very heated political moments that we're living in right now, I think the vast majority of us, Democrat or Republican, urban, suburban, or rural, wake up wanting to do good and being responsive to the stories and the needs of our constituents. So if you are so willing, I would encourage you to, one, pay attention to the news as we propose mental health initiatives, and two, advocate for them. You have a wonderful group in Mental Health America. There's a lot of them across the state and across the country that are fighting for good. I would really encourage you to hook in with them, find an issue that you're passionate about, find a legislative solution that's been proposed, and move forward on trying to lobby for it. That stuff matters. It matters more, maybe, at least at my level, we only represent 65,000 people, and I think it matters more than maybe you'd anticipate, because we do want to do good work. Democrat, Republican, House or Senate, we're here to do good things, and I've definitely found that, despite the moment. I think people still want to do good work in the legislature. So thank you very much for listening. And with that, Lori, I'm happy to answer any questions from the crowd.
So we do have some questions in the chat. And one of is comment from Mandy, who Westmoreland Community Action runs the crisis hotline in Westmoreland County.
Oh, okay.
And so she's on the line, and she says that now it's moved. Okay, our county behavioral health supports our crisis hotline and mobile crisis response. I'm going to add my editorial comment that I think we're going to need more as 988 becomes more highly publicized, and it's easier to access this. So I applaud your efforts for supporting that, because it is a great need. And if people can call a hotline, then they might be able to be diverted from using higher level, more expensive services.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we've really seen popping up across the state and some individual municipalities are starting to deal with more is dispatching social workers in addition to law enforcement, or, social worker taking the lead in law enforcement, more or less supplementing. We know that a huge percentage of the people that police interact with have some sort of mental illness. And by doing that, you can often divert somebody from more expensive and criminal related issues. And that can be extremely helpful.
I know that we have some staff from the county office also joining us this evening, and they have been very supportive of the CIT initiatives. And
Yep.
there have been 2 critical incident trainings that have occurred in Westmoreland County just in this last year, and that we hope that we can be able to have funding to have more. Can you talk a little bit more about what that is and why you might be supportive of that?
So as I understand it, the CIT funding is geared towards helping police officers diffuse and de-escalate some sort of situation that involves an individual who might be experiencing a crisis, who might be having some sort of active mental illness. It has been useful. I know in my community, I'm in the city of Allentown and South Whitehall Township. We've had a lot of officers go through that training. We also there now have at least one social worker available on every shift to try to dispatch resources as are actually needed. I will say, I want to add to what the commissioner just said. It's been very interesting, and I've definitely seen this. It's becoming more and more commonplace among younger police officers. And among new training, because the younger men and women who are entering law enforcement often understand that need more than older officers do. Now, that's obviously not a complete statement, but the fact that it is moving more towards part of the police culture gives me hope for the future, especially in a place like the city of Allentown. We have an extremely young police force, and it reduces the odds of there being some sort of unnecessary escalation later down the line. And I'm starting to see a couple of questions. So let me start with Mary Beth's. What do I feel is the most urgent, and what should we be talking to our representative about? So the pieces of legislation that are currently moving they're important, but I don't think they're as important as funding. Now, here's the thing. I said, advocate for something specific. I don't have a specific funding proposal yet. The governor comes out with his budget in January and February. I actually had a digital meeting with the governor and one of our behavioral health providers literally early today, and we started talking about the need to do just that. The best thing, in lieu of a specific funding increase proposal, I think the best thing that you can do to talk to your legislators is explain the dire needs that you're in. If you are a service provider, if you work for the county, or if you work for law enforcement, you see it all the time. And I think it's vital that you have conversations that explicitly say, we're only operating at X capacity. I go back to my example with Kids Peace today, with them telling me that they were only at 50% capacity. For the leading behavioral health agency for children in my neck of the woods to tell me they only had 50% of staff available, essentially, that's terrifying. And to be able to tell, I'm a legislator, so in my case, to be able to tell my leadership and tell the governor's office, that's important. So I would definitely encourage all of you to make sure that your legislative delegation is aware of the capacity issues that you hear, that you have, and don't talk about it from an organizational perspective. Talk about it from the perspective of their constituents. It may not apply to you, but the most impactful lobbying meetings that I've ever had in my career are when a lobbyist or a constituent comes in and says, here, that's how many constituents of yours are affected. So to be able to have exact numbers about constituents, or, that's not going to be possible in some cases, or region, that makes a difference. It really does. And I see more questions. 1 or 2 goals from the statewide suicide plan. That's an excellent question, because that, unfortunately, you know what, Beth, please email me, Beth, if you can, to follow up, because I don't have an answer offhand. The suicide plan was finished in late 2019, and then 2020 happened and everything kind of went to hell. So please, if you could shoot me an email, I'll be more than happy to get back to you. Please feel free to share my responses. I don't know. Because COVID has taken up so much bandwidth, I don't have an answer. And I think, let me pivot a little bit on that one too, talking about COVID and the real harm of COVID, which was the lost opportunities. So in January 2020, beginning of 2020, I joined Governor Wolf at a press conference with other advocates, legislative leaders, and more to kick off Reach Out PA, which was the governor's 2020 mental health initiative. He was going to reach out to stakeholders, build support for vitally needed initiatives, and hopefully increase funding to mental health. Again, January of 2020. And we all know what happened a couple of months later. And the initiative was lost. And I obviously don't mean that as criticism. We all got a little bit busy. And in fact, Governor, Secretary Levine, and now the acting physician general have been extremely good talking about mental health resources that are available. But how much forward momentum did we lose? And in a sense, I would honestly argue from a policy perspective that that's the real impact of COVID. We lost so many opportunities. How can we move our private funders and foundations to help these programs in the 988 system? Great question. So the 988 system is going to require a lot of planning as we convert it from suicide prevention hotline to 988 and then expand it. I think, and you know, every system's a little bit different, but I think the best thing that any provider can do as we talk about private foundations and funding 988 is get planning grants and figure out and use those private foundation dollars to figure out what the specific needs are for conversion of your system to 988, and then figure out how many more, you know, in an ideal world, how many more crisis workers would you need? Where can you get that money? That sort of thing. I think that that's a better use than using private funding or than using private funding or foundations for operational expenses, because obviously for operational expenses, you need some sort of sustainable revenue stream. And that's something where you do need public dollars in the long run. Oh, and obviously make a donation marked. Donations are always good. Can't. Mine is friends of Mike Schlossberg. Just kidding. Anyway.
I had a question about the carve out and the behavioral health carve out.
Mm-hmm.
And I know once again, legislation has been introduced or was being planned to be introduced to revert from the carve out system. And many of us in the behavioral health provider network and the advocates really in Pennsylvania value the carve out.
Yeah.
And we believe that it protects services for behavioral health and there's many positive things like reinvestment dollars and many other programs that are very consumer focused that we would like to see preserved. So I was wondering if you could comment on that.
And I can tell you, I do not see that changing from where it's at right now. Last session, there seemed to be a little bit more momentum for it. There was some talk that it might get a committee vote, but it never even got that far. And I can definitely tell you, fortunately, advocates for maintaining the system as it is are pretty powerful and politically connected. And I just don't see that happening right now. Well, say again, Lori, you got low there.
I said, thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
Oh, yes, yes.
Maybe that was like a little editorial comment that I...
Mumbling under your breath.
I know that Westmoreland County has a very active suicide, which you've heard a little bit about in the VIP room, awareness and prevention task force. Mm-hmm. Has there been any discussion of trying to have these in all of the different counties across Pennsylvania? Because, you know, for example, in Allegheny County, they just formed one within the last year, and there is no additional funding to form these valuable programs. And some of the, I call it safety net funding that gets passed through from the state with the budget is utilized to support some of these programs. And without an increase in the state budget, it's very difficult to continue with unfunded programming.
Yeah, I have not heard any specific conversations about that. No, that's something that certainly could be captured in a variety of different funding streams, including if we were able to get an increase for mental health and then pass that down to the counties. I will say that if the legislation I've proposed were to become a law, it could give suicide task forces an additional responsibility by formalizing some of the death review teams that I know a lot of suicide task forces have branched into. But beyond that, no, I haven't heard anything.
other questions that we missed in the chat? I don't think so. I want to thank you so very much for being so generous with your time this evening. We really appreciate it very, very much.
Well, it's my pleasure. I will, again, I just copy and pasted. I just put my Twitter handle and my email address in. I'm always more than happy to talk to anybody with any questions. Thank you all for your advocacy for what you do. And congratulations to the award winners. I didn't get a chance to say it, but those were some wonderful stories. And I'm honored to be able to take part today.
At this point, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Kim Sonnefeld to conclude her remarks.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. Thank you, Representative Schlossberg. It was wonderful. I love your enthusiasm, and I was glad I got to hear you today. Toni, thank you for being continuing to be part of MHA. Thank you for your advocacy and just being there for everybody. Just being the internal advocate that you are. Thank you very much. Once again, I just want to let everybody know that MHA is going to have their annual conference. It's going to be virtual again this year. Information is going to be coming, but it is the 2nd and 3rd of December, 2 half days. There will be CEUs that will be available. So it was a great conference last year. So Community Care and UPMC are our sponsors, along with some of the other sponsors. So thank you for your continued sponsorship of the educational events. We're hoping to see some of you at our virtual conference. Again, one last plug, if you have not become a Bella Hope member yet, please consider it. The donations are used to support really great programs and things like the Art Cellar. So please consider that, especially in the midst of COVID-19. And with that, I just want to thank you all for spending the evening with us, and I wish you health and see you at the conference. Bye. Take care.